Welcome back to Map the Maze. So this month, I wanted to focus on how to get a little help. And that could be from friends and family, which I think is often the first port of call for most people, or it could be from professionals, or it could be from yourself. And I'm going to focus on each of those things this month. Today, I wanted to focus on third-party assistance. The first person that most people say that they have spoken to about their separation and divorce is a counselor or a psychologist or a therapist, a mental health professional who is helping to provide them with emotional support and maybe also some kind of therapeutic assistance to processing what's happening. And from my perspective, ideally, some guidance as to how they can help manage themselves in the process. So it could be CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, about ways in which to reduce anxiety and to enable people to focus. It could be really simple tools for how to work in the mediation so that you don't get distracted, that you can manage and regulate your emotions, in order to be able to negotiate for yourself. There are lots of different things that are helpful. Sometimes I speak to people and they say, I don't want to go and see somebody. And I always try and ask, so how will you get emotional support through this process? For most people that I work with, I think this is one of, if not the most difficult thing that people do. And so to do it by yourself, there's no nobility in suffering in that sense. If there is help available and you can find it, then I would strongly suggest reaching out and getting some. That we all need help from time to time from different types of people. And I think for people who are going through separation and divorce, a counselor, it could be somebody that you see every week, or it could be somebody that you see on an ad hoc basis, that support can be really powerful. So to give you an example, I was working with a couple last year and they'd been married pretty much for their entire adult lives. So a very long marriage and had really kind of grown up together. And what was interesting is that when I met the wife at her intake and there had been an affair, that she mentioned it to explain why the separation was happening, but it didn't become a focus. And very often when I meet people where there has been an affair, there has been infidelity, that is the focus. That is what they want to talk about. Understandably, it is a major part of what's happening in their lives. The challenge is that for the mediation, it's happened. We can't go back and change that. And we can't stop people from having affairs. We can't stop people from committing adultery. So one of the challenges is that when I'm working with people who are very focused on the new partner or the affair, it can derail their focus from what they need to achieve in the mediation. And if you think back to that book, Getting More by Stuart Diamond, that's what he talks about, is how you're behaving. Is your mindset getting you closer to achieving your goals or further away? Is it helping you to achieve what you want or not? And if it's not helping to achieve what you want, ditch it. Focus on something else. So this lady explained that there had been an affair and that was why they were separating. And I started preparing for the conversation that almost inevitably happens about the new partner, and it didn't happen. And she started talking to me about how she'd been working with a counselor who had really helped her to process what had happened in the relationship and also to understand that this new partner is not important to her, is not important in her life. That actually what's important is, what is her future going to look like? What is she going to do to look after herself to make sure that she is in the best position possible moving forward? And what she said is, the counselor explained that the new partner is a symptom of something that was not going right. They're not important in themselves. And I have to say, it was really nice to hear that and to hear how helpful that had been for her, how supportive that had been for her, because what it meant is when we came to the mediation, she was really able to focus on getting the information she needed, on asking the questions she needed to ask, on understanding what she needed to do, and focusing on what did she need for her future? What did she want the arrangements to look like? And being laser focused on how to achieve that. And what it meant is that I think, she had not just an easier mediation, because it was definitely easier in the sense that we didn't have to go back over what can be relatively inflammatory discussions around, I can't believe you did this, you made these terrible choices, but just that her focus was solid and that she was able to really hone in on what was going to make a difference for her. And for me, it was just really, it was lovely to see that somebody could be devastated by what had happened, could be upset, definitely hadn't forgiven the other person and wasn't going to forget, didn't think it was okay, but could say, okay, that's happened, line in the sand, let me compartmentalize that. Today I have to focus on how are we going to divide the assets. And I think it was really powerful, that it was really helpful for her to have worked with somebody who was really able to give her that gift of empowering herself. I think it's really important when you're looking to find a counselor that you think about, well, what do I really want? What do I want this person to be able to do for me, so that you're clear when you go and speak to people? One thing I would say is, often people say to me, oh, no, no, we went to a counselor and it doesn't work. Counseling doesn't work. And I guess what I will say to those people is, maybe that relationship with that counselor didn't work, but it doesn't mean that all counselors won't work for you. And I think that's really important, that just as you need to find a mediator who is a good fit for you and for your ex-partner so that you can work together in a productive way, it's really important to find a counselor that's a good fit for you. And somebody could be the best counselor in the world and not be right for you, because you need to have that rapport, that sense of, I'm being um, I'm being spoken to, I'm being listened to, this person's working with me in a way which I'm finding supportive, as opposed to judgmental or difficult or awkward. So I guess what I would say is, if you're looking for a counselor, definitely make sure that you speak to them before you start working with them, just to get a sense of, is this somebody that I feel I can talk to about my most intimate needs, fears, and concerns about the things that have really happened, so that they can help to support me. So I think one thing I would say is, make sure that you have somebody that you feel comfortable with, really important. The other thing I would say, and it's a little bit strange, and you may not have thought about this unless you're in a mediation and watching people interact, but one of the challenges I see often is that people will come to intake and they'll say to me, oh, my counselor who I've been working with is great. And they've explained that my former partner is a narcissist, has a personality disorder, is a psychopath. And the challenge is, often that counselor, that psychologist, has never met the other person, has never heard their story of what happened in the relationship. And whilst it might be interesting to engage in armchair diagnoses, it's not helpful. So, from my perspective, again, just as in getting more, is sitting there thinking, well, now I have to negotiate with a psychopath. Is that going to help you to feel more empowered in the negotiation, or is that going to make you feel disempowered? I think the other challenge is that people then become very fixated on that, can become very fixated on that. And then everything becomes about, oh, well, of course they're doing this, they're a narcissist. And actually, from my perspective, what's more productive in a mediation is focusing on behavior. That, I'm not a psychologist. I don't think I've ever yet worked with a psychologist. So no one is really in a position in the room to diagnose anyone else. But what we can talk about is behaviors and impact. So we can say, well, this is the behavior that's happened. This has been the impact. If that needs to change, say, for example, it's around co-parenting, what would the change look like? We can talk about the practicalities, but getting locked into discussions around, is someone a narcissist, from my perspective, isn't helpful. Because again, going back to getting more, just sitting there thinking, well, now I've got to battle somebody that's got a personality disorder and try and negotiate with them. Does that make you feel like you're in a better position to negotiate or a worse position? Often when I work with people whose counselors have diagnosed the ex-partner, they feel quite disempowered by those comments, that it's almost as if, oh, well, of course this can't work. Of course I can't get an agreement with them. They have a personality disorder. And whilst that could be true, who knows? I don't know. And I'm certainly not in a position to say, I don't think it helps the negotiation to make it better. I don't think people get better results if they feel that they've diagnosed their former partners. So I would say be careful. And then if you're sitting there in the counsel saying, well, I can already see that, your ex-partner was ABC, fill in the gap, then I think you need to be a bit wary and just say, that's interesting. Can we focus back on me? Yeah, because at the end of the day, they're there to help you. So what is helpful for you? I definitely find that a lot of people like having that contact with the counselor around their mediation sessions. So some people might go before mediation in order to get into a sort of a calm, focused state so that they can come to the mediation and be prepared. They may also have been given some tools to use during the mediation to stay calm, to stay focused, to help regulate emotion, to stay on track. And that can be really helpful. And then I also have clients who go after the session, that after the mediation session, they want to have somebody who's trusted that they can sit down with and process what happened, can try and understand a little bit more about what happened, how to do it better next time, and also just to debrief. So debrief with somebody who is a professional, who can give real assistance in terms of analyzing what happened. So I think that can be really helpful. And from my perspective, finding a good counselor is one way that I think people can smooth the path for themselves through mediation. I've had very few clients, just two I can think of, who actually wanted to bring a counselor or an emotional support person who was a mental health professional to the mediation. And I think that can be helpful. I guess what I would say is it can be expensive, obviously, having somebody sit there, but also just we need to have consent from everybody in the room. And sometimes that may be given and sometimes it may not be. So I think if you think it would be really helpful, then speak to your mediator, explain why you think it would be really helpful for you to have them there, and see if the mediator can either consent or then can seek consent from the other party. The second type of professional that almost all of my clients work with is a lawyer. And that often, if the counselor hasn't been the first port of call when divorce and separation comes onto the table, it's often a lawyer. That, from my perspective, I don't think any family law around separation and divorce are intuitive in any jurisdiction that I'm aware of. They are all a little bit Byzantine and a little bit difficult to understand, and particularly at a moment when you are generally in the most chaos and turmoil of your life, to then have to try and understand a whole new area of the law is a big ask. So relying on lawyers, really important. And I think what I see from lawyers when people come back and speak to me in their intakes is that often the lawyers have been able to give their clients a bit of a roadmap. What is it going to look like going forward? So if you go to mediation and that works out, what does that look like? If you go to mediation and it doesn't work out, what does that look like? What does that path look like in terms of what will happen? How long will it take? How much will it cost? I think all of those questions really important. The other things that lawyers obviously can really help with is giving advice. So based on your circumstances, based on your situation, this is the range of legal outcomes that I think is likely, although obviously, as you'll appreciate, no lawyer gives guarantees. But this is what I think is likely, and that can help with setting expectations. I guess what I would say is if you are speaking to a lawyer about expectations, just make sure that you ask, what happens for me on a good day in court? So if I get everything that I want, the judge decides I am the most credible person in the room, what does that look like? And on the bad day for me in court, actually, I don't get anything that I want, and the judge doesn't think that I'm a credible witness. What does that look like? Because then you get a range, and that will really enable you to negotiate in a more informed way. But one of the challenges is sometimes when I see clients who come in and their lawyers have said, oh, you should get X, and X might be a percentage, or it might be a dollar value, or it might be a number of overnights, or it could be anything. And the challenge is, and I think we've talked about cognitive biases before, but we anchor as humans, we anchor to the first number, the first quantitative value that we hear. And in the mediation, if you come in thinking, well, my lawyer says I have to get X, people can be at kind of X minus one, and they're like, no, it's a no. And you're like, okay, but we've closed this massive gap from like X minus 100 to X minus one or X plus one. Can we get this done? Because you're never going to get the target. So I think just be careful that if you're speaking to your lawyers, definitely you need to have some advice around what is the range of legal outcomes, but make sure you're getting a range, not a number. The other thing that I often talk with solicitors about, particularly, is that they see clients use them in different ways. And for a lot of the clients that I work with, they're very conscious about cost, and obviously legal advice and lawyers are expensive. And so they will try and minimize how much they use their lawyers. And it can be quite strategic. So they'll go off and speak to them initially to kind of figure out what does that roadmap look like? What are some of the concerns they might need to deal with? Maybe get some advice even about how to find a mediator or finding a mediator. Then, when we start doing the negotiation and the mediation, they'll speak to their solicitors to get advice about the specific parts of the negotiation. In my experience, generally the financial is the hardest bit for most people. And then they come back to the mediation, negotiate. When they have a draft agreement, they take that back to the lawyer reviews it before anything is signed, and that becomes sort of their method of using. So it's a relatively limited engagement, and it can lead to less fees. I also have clients who, as I don't know this, but solicitors tell me, who are kind of on the phone with their solicitors almost every day or every couple of days. And often it can seem as if it's around getting legal advice, but actually I think a lot of it is getting emotional support, is talking to a professional person who understands the context of what's going on and the intricacies of their particular case. The challenge is that lawyers are not trained to be emotional support. They might, um, coincidentally be good at doing that, but they're not trained to do it. And they are a very expensive way of providing yourself with emotional support. So I guess I would say, think about who do you want to work with? Information are they giving you around the range of legal outcomes? And then also, how am I going to use them? Am I going to use them sort of sparingly? Am I going to maybe even bring them to the mediation? And definitely some people feel that it's really helpful to bring their lawyers to the mediation, whether that's because they feel disempowered around the information, or it's very difficult maybe to talk to the person on the other side, or maybe what we're trying to put in place is a very complex arrangement, and actually it's easier to have the lawyers in the room rather than have to kind of go back and refer to them later. So think about, how do you want to use that resource? Because at the end of the day, the lawyer is a resource for you. One thing I would say is, and this is something to be careful about because I've seen it happen a couple of times, is lawyers give advice based on their best knowledge, experience, expertise. But at the end of the day, it's advice. It's not, you must follow this. They're not there to tell you what to do. They're there to give you advice so that you can make choices for yourself based on your values and your needs. And I've definitely seen clients who have made decisions in mediation which maybe weren't 100% aligned with the advice that they had. And they've felt awkward about having to say to their lawyers, I didn't get everything you said I should get, or I didn't hold out for this number, or I gave more than you said I should give. And sometimes they'll ask me to help explain to their lawyers why that's happened. If the lawyers are in the mediation, generally they can see why it's happening. But if they're outside the mediation, it can be difficult for them to understand, actually, there are other interests, there are other priorities that are going on here, which explain why someone has made a decision to understand the legal advice, but do something different. And I guess I would say to you, I try and remind clients, you're the client. They work for you. So you don't need to justify yourself to your lawyer. They're there to help you and to give you advice, absolutely. But they're not there to make decisions for you. So if you do end up making a decision in mediation to either give more or take less than your lawyer says, that's not something to be embarrassed about. That's just a decision you've made based on the priorities that you have. So I guess I would say, don't forget, you're the client. The third type of person I often see, professional that I often see people working with, is a financial advisor. And that can be for different reasons. So it might be because somebody wants help analyzing the information that they're looking at, or it could be because they want assistance with how to invest those assets once they have them, how to look after the money, how much they're going to need, what the needs might be for their children. And so there are lots of ways that financial advisors can be really helpful. Again, you need to find somebody that you feel comfortable with. And definitely, I can think of financial advisors who have come to the mediation and been really helpful in terms of talking about these are options for structure, particularly if there are difficult tax implications in your jurisdiction, which can make one arrangement more tax efficient than another, giving people assistance about, well, with this asset, you can then generate this much income. Understanding things like that can be really helpful. And so, generally, in my experience, they come maybe for one party, but actually they end up being helpful for both parties. So, if there are lots of assets and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or if you're thinking, I really don't know how to manage this to generate income afterwards, it can be worth thinking about finding a financial advisor to work with. Obviously, again, it needs to be somebody that you feel comfortable with, and also somebody that isn't there for themselves. So they're not there to just sell you lots of product, that actually they're there to help give you some impartial, independent advice about how you can manage going forward. So from my perspective, those are the top three professionals that I see people working with. And each of them, I can think of amazing examples where they have really helped to support their client and made the difference for some clients in being able to get through their mediation and come out on the other side in a good place. So have a think. If there is a need, I would suggest doing some legwork, do some asking around. There are always people who have had experiences, but definitely go and meet these professionals for yourselves or have a conversation with them yourselves. See if you feel comfortable and that you have a sense of rapport with them. So take care, and I will see you